A couple of weeks ago, I talked about the rapidly fragmenting landscape of religion. For that talk, I asked a basic question: what the heck is religion anyway? What one discovers fairly quickly in digging down a bit is that religion isn't as easy to define as it might at first appear. One concise answer I used a couple of weeks ago comes from William James, who opined that religion is about, one, an uneasiness, and two, the solution to that uneasiness. Notice that James is looking at the personal in religion. That's, what goes on in the human brain. Another way of defining religion is the way Dr. Lofton at Yale Divinity School, in the reading this morning, defines it. Quote, "Religion is a word for how people consciously organize themselves in the world and unconsciously are organized by the world." And notice that this is about the public and the communal together. It's how you do things and how you think. An idea that came up as I discussed the concept of religion with some of you during Social Hour a couple of weeks ago originates from the religion scholar Reza Aslan, who is very clear about what religion is. Nobody knows. Aslan is willing to take a stab at a one-word definition, however, and that word is not God or morality or ethics or love, but identity. Identity. And notice that that is about the public side of religion. These are the ideas I want to throw into a sack and shake a little bit on this Super Bowl Sunday as the city of Minneapolis roils with a bustle of hundreds of thousands of visitors and fans. After all, it's difficult not to see this yearly ritual as some sort of mass religion. What are we saying when we say the word religion? And what do we think we're doing when we do religion? Well, first, let's consider the insight that Dr. John Dietrich brought to this congregation when he was called back in 1917. Dietrich imagined an American Protestant-style religious gathering that could be done without reference to a God or traditional religious trappings such as scripture or religious language. Secular poetry and secular music, Dietrich thought, would do just as well. Out of this insight, Dietrich and the people of this congregation created what they called religious humanism and what today I like to call congregational humanism. 101 years of weekly meetings have proven that the model does work. And today, UU ministers, ethical culture leaders, and humanist celebrants across the nation serve the life passage needs of people who do not identify in traditional religious terms. But there is a problem with John Dietrich's old model. When Dietrich arrived here in 1917, most everyone in the city belonged to a congregation of one sort or another. When Dietrich and his partner in humanism, Curtis Reese, thought they were doing back in those days was placing a time bomb under Christian dogma, but they were keeping the idea of a congregation. They thought that science and critical thinking and technology and democracy would destroy ideas that they considered to be old-fashioned, such ideas as a God who is much like a European king, such ideas as praying rather than rolling up your sleeves and getting to work, such ideas as passivity in the face of government, economics, superstition, and the human condition in general. A century and more have shown that they were only partially correct in their assumptions. What blew up was not superstition or the human need for the spiritual. Rather, it was the social binding that religion offered that went to pieces over these 10 decades. The telephone, the automobile, the radio, then television, then the internet, Since 1917, the physical bodies and brains of our species have evolved in the slow, halting pace that they have always evolved. But our technology has developed at breakneck speed. In the century of humanism, capitalism went from a system severely questioned by the Russian Bolshevik Revolution and then the economic collapse of the Great Depression. And then it became the only game in town for most of the human beings on our planet. Things have changed, and our thinking about what religion means must change as well. The reading this morning is from Dr. Catherine Lofton, who's a professor of religious studies, American studies, history, and divinity at Yale, as I mentioned. And I mentioned that because she is in a truly postmodern position of looking at what religion is. In her latest book, called Consuming Religion, Dr. Lofton writes, "First, nobody evades being organized by something. Second, if you're being organized by something, it's worth learning the terms for that organization. And as I read earlier, third, if you learn those points, you are studying religion." Notice that this definition addresses both private and public aspects of the human religious impulse. This is the idea I want to explore today, the organizing principle of religion, what Dr. Reza Aslan calls identity. As we heard in the reading, Dr. Lofton believes that organization is the essence of religion. The question is, what is organizing us, and how aware are we of how we are being organized? Lofton argues that we're looking at the wrong thing about religion when we look for traditional religious trappings, such as the search for the sacred. Lofton argues that religion is, at its base, an organizing principle, and any and all organizing principles should be considered religions. That's important to the argument. We call football a religion. We call political parties religions. We call capitalism a religion. Cooking, birding, the employees at Goldman Sachs call the corporate culture at Goldman Sachs a religion. Again, Lofton is making a bold claim. Anything that organizes, either physically or socially or mentally, is a religion. Clearly, we can't escape being organized by various forces, but what we can do is be conscious of the power of organization and use it rather than be used by it. Now, actually, this insight is the one that Unitarian transcendentalists embraced a long time ago. In mid-20th century America, people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Margaret Fuller, Henry David Thoreau claimed that nature itself is sacred, and therefore walking in the woods is as sacred or even more sacred than going to church. Well, why? Because nature encourages us to think outside of social structures, which is basically the keystone of transcendentalism. The humanist insight is that even if there is a God, that God is unlikely to have anything to do with human problems or human actions. Therefore, meaning and purpose and moral action are all human constructs in the hands of the human collective. All ordering is human, claims humanism. Therefore, we humans have the freedom to rethink all social norms and assumptions. This insight led the first generation of humanists to democratic socialism during the Great Depression of the 1930s, because they insisted that human beings create economies and consequently human actions create the economic inequalities. The social order is a human order, and the first Humanist Manifesto in 1933 insisted on a shared life for all the people in a shared world. Since the Cold War, mainstream economic theory has insisted that only market capitalism can create the sorts of societies in which economic opportunity and liberal social policy can exist, that inviolability of the individual choice. Neoliberalism is the term that has emerged for that set of assumptions. They are ways of ordering reality. Let's face it, most American citizens have no real choice in their economic circumstance. In the neoliberal scenario, part of the collateral damage of free market capitalism is that most people live lives of economic desperation. Many Americans love the fact that we can choose which video game to play or which television show to binge watch, but these same Americans do not consider whether or not to go deeply into debt. That's a given in our consumer culture. Being a consumer and servicing debt are the ordering of our lives in this country. It's our religion, Dr. Lofton claims. Remember the words, nobody evades being organized by something. It's a good question to ponder. What's organizing you? What is your religion really? Economics? Politics? Social class? Education? Race? Gender? Age? Health? Probably a whole array of those things and more. The act of looking at those organizational principles is the act of religion. I like that definition of religion. Religion becomes an act of meta, looking at our lives from a kind of above angle. Dr. Lofton encourages each of us to engage in the ultimate religious question. What is the order of the order you have chosen to order your life? And are you choosing that order, or is that order choosing you? Is your ordering inevitable? Keep asking, she says. That's doing religion. Dr. Lofton goes on to say, quote, where our social and ritual interests are placed now is not in denominational tradition, but in workplace culture. Not in inherited objects, but recently purchased goods. Not archaic icons, but an endlessly rotating cast of minor and major celebrities. I wonder who's doing the Super Bowl today. And how holy are they? Ordering, identity, what we actually allow to order our lives. John Dietrich and Curtis Reese, the two horsemen of the humanist apocalypse in the early 20th century, did not foresee that congregational affiliation would become as easily changeable as tennis shoes and just as easily discarded. Dietrich remained a minister in this congregation for 22 years. Now, that's a commitment to congregational doing things, isn't it? Curtis Reese, however, his buddy, left congregational ministry entirely. Reese became the first president of the American Humanist Association in 1941. The AHA has been a secular alternative to religious gatherings all of these years. In terms of the ability of religions to adapt and innovate, humanism, in other words, was born already as an adaptation. It was an ordering and identity principle. As second-wave feminists said long ago, the personal is political. The political is also personal. How our society will shape and order your existence can be deadly. From racism to fat shaming, from heteronormativity to position and wealth, none of us is ever free from the social ordering in our lives. One thing congregations can do better than any other place, I think, is put those ordering social assumptions under interrogation. That's the first reason to congregate, I believe, to gather with other human beings, because that is how we human beings have evolved, in groups, pushing and shoving and hugging each other. As I've mentioned before, it's amazing, but the largest donors to our capital campaign here and our largest yearly pledgers here at this society insist on being anonymous. That is countercultural, for sure, in a nation where money and social class determine everything from where you live to what you eat to how long you will live. That humanist insight that we choose to order our lives questions basic social assumptions. What else does this congregation do for those who congregate here? We've talked before about how John Dietrich claimed that humanists don't need pastoral care. They can do it themselves. He thought humanists can work through life's problems on their own. Again, that's that personal aspect of religion. Now, from one angle, that's a really silly thing to say. From another, it does make sense. The fact is, humanists don't tend to go to their religious leaders for the same reasons that traditional religious people go to their religious leaders. Humanists aren't likely to go to me and ask, why did God do this? Most humanists don't think there's a God that does much of anything. Why did God send that tsunami? The humanist answer is he didn't. Why did God give me cancer? The humanist answer is he didn't. Those why conversations are fairly short among us humanists. People like to build on ocean fronts in the Pacific. Ocean fronts in the Pacific occasionally get hit by tsunamis. Whether or not you or a loved one or an acquaintance happen to be on the Pacific beachfront when a tsunami hits is a matter of happenstance. That's the humanist answer. These are easy conversations for us. We know that, as Bill Nye the Science Guy is fond of putting it, everything happens for a reason, and that reason is usually physics. But that doesn't mean that pastoral care isn't important in a primarily humanist congregation. It's just that our questions tend to be different. For example, the grief process is an evolved feature of the human mind. We humanists know that. We all know that natural disasters hit, that people suffer and die in all kinds of ways, sometimes tragically, sometimes because organic life necessarily has an expiration date. Knowing that suffering and death are natural and inevitable parts of human life doesn't mean they don't hurt. It's just that we think we know why. We have a grief group here not because we are attempting to explain away grief or convince ourselves that our loved ones are in a better place, but because it helps to think about it and talk about our grief. That's the personal in congregational humanism. Humanism is, kind of the Swiss Army knife of religious thought because the principles of humanism are really kind of short and sweet. Number one, the universe is flying apart at an accelerating rate. Therefore, the only constant is change. Two, human beings have created the ideas of meaning and purpose, and therefore each of us must create meaning and purpose in our own lives. Three, the bottom line is that we evolved as communal animals, and therefore we need each other and we need to have each other's backs. That's about it. It's pretty short and sweet. Catherine Lofton says, quote, I want scholars, thinkers, students, and citizens to imagine what work they might make religion do for them to organize the world other than how it has been organized, end quote. That's it, I think. From the personal to the public, we congregate to aggregate our human power. From the personal to the political, I am because we are. And we are because we interrogate the choices we are making and the choices that are making us.